Hi, everyone. We are here today with Maggie Greyson, who's a futurist and who's someone who I believe is a change maker. Hi, Maggie.
Hi, Lee.
So I'm so happy that you're here and able to join me today. And one of the things I just wanted to kind of start off with is introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm a designer and a futurist. And the work that I do is helping individuals and organizations to think about the future so that they can make decisions today.
Yeah. So I love it. You're a futurist. You're the CEO of Futures Present, or is it Futures Present?
Actually, it's Futures Present.
Yeah.
My background is theater design.
Okay.
So using Futures Present is totally in play.
Yeah.
And early on in the business, I was thinking, we could be a production company.
Okay.
Because talking about the future really is a very visual and experiential thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, maybe this looks like content that's created in video format, fake magazines, things like that. But that has ended up being a product of my bigger picture.
So what is that bigger picture?
The work that I do, I get hired as a designer because I was a theater designer for 10 years and I have those skills and they just keep coming back in storytelling and envisioning complex concepts. And I get hired as a designer because I'm a futurist, and I get hired as a futurist because I'm a designer.
Okay. So it's like how I feel like I'm theory and practice. Like the theory informs my practice, but the practice informs my theory. And so together we're constantly a revolving dynamic of being better.
Yeah, that's it.
You're a designer and a futurist. So I will totally be straight up. I remember when we first met each other, I was like, "You're a futurist?" I'm like, "What does that mean? Like, do you go, back to the future and we're in the DeLorean or something like that?" But what is a futurist?
Well, a futurist is kind of hard to pin down. Like the word innovation, it's something that's constantly evolving. So the work that I do as a futurist is maybe one way I can help to locate what that term is. I'm a very highly oriented process person. And what I use is a whole bunch of tools and workshops and facilitation to help people to think about the future in a, well-organized leap of faith, really. Okay. There's futurists or people who call themselves futurists. And really everyone is a futurist because they think about the future in some way or another. But there are some people who call themselves futurists like Elon Musk or Ray Kurzweil. And these are people who are really seeped in the tech world.
Okay.
And they call themselves futurists because they think about the future, but they're advertising for a future that they want.
Okay.
So
it's almost sounds like a futurist is someone who kind of has a vision for what the future could look like and then sort of works to manifesting it.
Some futurists do that.
Okay.
There's a broad spectrum. Some of them, like Ray Kurzweil and Elon Musk, are working towards a vision that's singularity. So humans and computers will merge and become one. Or we're going to Mars and we're going to live on a planet that has worse environmental impacts or environmental conditions than the Earth does. Okay. There's futurists that are sort of on another spectrum of helping us to understand the dire situation that we're in on our planet in many, many, many...
Like climate change and those type of
climate
things?
Climate change, human rights, other... the rise of right-wing regimes.
Okay.
And those futurists are there to remind us that this is constantly constantly a threat. And in between, there's people who do process. So the work that I do is helping organizations like food banks or health researchers to make decisions that are socially minded, have social impact, have social innovation, to get a future that's more equitable, healthy, sustainable. And the people that I work with they're mavericks and they're proactive. And the future that they want to bring about isn't something that they create themselves. It's something that they know that creating the future is community oriented. It's cultural. It's got a lot of stories to it, and that they aren't, controlling it. That the future is something that is manifested through a whole bunch of people's, directions and desires.
So it seems like so complicated, but yet also so simple, right? Like it's imagining what the future is, and there's different ways to engage that or to manifest that. So I've always been like, what is a futurist? How do we apply those skills, right? Like for people who are watching, how is it that someone can say, hey, how does this relate to me? Why should I care about futurism? Mm-hmm. I don't even know, because I know there's like a future society. Like you open my world to like all of these dynamics and people who are interested in thinking about the future and being proactive about shaping it. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting, but it's a concept that is really hard for me to wrap my head around. And so that's why I was like, Maggie, come and talk to me. What is a futurist? What can we do? Why should we know about it? And how are you sort of manifesting futures present?
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this conversation into this forum. So I'll start with the challenge, which is we think about today in a lot of detail. How am I going to get here? What am I going to feel like after this coffee or tea? We plan our meals for the week. What we're not planning for is things that you bring in your work. So, what's this home going to feel like in 20 years from now?
Yeah.
Is it going to fit my needs?
Yeah.
Is this community going to be one that I want to play a part in?
Okay. Yeah.
So when we're thinking about the future in a strategic way, and specifically the practice that I do is called strategic foresight.
Okay.
We use 2050 or 2070 far into the future as the hook to kind of pull us into, what if we expanded into the green belt? What if we continued to eat meat at the rate that we do? What if we didn't build, more infrastructure for the city that is, anticipating to be many more millions of people here? And in fact, these are things that are assumptions and best guesses and attempts at trying to shape a better world.
Okay.
However, a futurist like myself will create lots and lots of different scenarios that push the boundaries on the what ifs. So as an example, what if Toronto was underwater? We have a lot of flood maps.
Absolutely. Yes.
So what if Toronto was underwater in, let's just say 2030, because that's a target that the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are really targeted towards. And there's a whole lot of conversation about that we can go into, but let's stay here and now. So what if Toronto was underwater? What if the number of people expected to come to Toronto didn't? What if Toronto was purchased by the US? Right? These are all like seemingly extreme situations when we go to this binary situation.
But it's not though, because I just had member of provincial parliament, Mary Margaret McMahon, come and talk to us about flooding, and 10% of Canadian homes are like at risk of flood risk. So it's not that far off. And when you look at the flood maps, Toronto has many areas that are susceptible to flooding, and people don't know about it. So that proposition that you make is not unrealistic. Like, it is something very real. And if we don't do something about it now, what will happen if? It's actually really interesting. It's kind of blowing my mind right now thinking about that, because I just had that conversation with Mary Margaret about how important it is and how can we protect ourselves. But so it sounds like, so what you're saying is very aligned with how do we prevent that from happening, right? Asking questions that may not necessarily happen, but could happen if we don't do anything about it. Yes?
Yes, and?
Okay.
The first question, excuse me, first question is what if?
What if,
So,
yeah.
What if 10%, excuse me.
It's all good. Have a sip of your tea or coffee or whatever it is that you have. You're doubling it, so I love it.
I know, I'm ready. I'm ready for a great conversation.
Yes.
And I'm not leaving till both of these are done.
Excellent.
So the first question is what if? What if 10% was underwater? Second question is so what?
Okay. What if and so what?
So what if 10% is underwater? Are we able to control that? Is that what we want? What mitigation measures are we going to take? Does this affect everybody? Do we care? So what if people leave those houses that are 10% potentially 10% underwater? Or what if they're attractive because they're cheaper and people are hedging a bet? So we start to spin into scenarios that then can become, two-pronged. So what if those houses that are in the flood area are cheaper? So what if those houses that are cheaper become magnets for people who can't afford proper housing? So what if people who can't afford proper housing all end up in an area that has high potential of disintegration? So what if this area has a lot of potential disintegration? Well, if we look at a city, for example, like Detroit or other dying cities in North America as a base example for today, what do we learn from what they're doing? What are they struggling with? What have they struggled with? What do those areas look like that are abandoned?
Yeah, no, Detroit has had this ongoing issue for decades after the boom and bust of the auto industry, right? And I visited it, and you knew that it was once a hustling, bustling city that had, big, lots of roads and infrastructure for it. But now it's like a ghost town. I mean, not a ghost town, but there isn't that amount of traffic anymore, right? Because people aren't there, and it's not the city that it once was. It's sort of a shadow of itself. So it's almost like when you say the what if, what have people been doing, or what did they do in that situation? But it's also what didn't they do, right? As an inverse. Okay. I'm following.
Okay. So I'm really glad that that you do so many different things, because I'm able to kind of serve up an example, and you can make it practical and real, and you can see it, and start to think about the nuances around it.
Yeah.
So what happened to Detroit? What are some of the successes that are happening in that city?
Yeah. Is that a question for me?
Well, if you know, I mean,
Well,
you've been there, so maybe there's things.
I mean, I'm not an expert on Detroit, but I do, from what I do know, because I actually had looked at moving there, because in my previous life, I was a museum educator, and Detroit was one of these places where was an option of moving to, and they were trying to, because it was no longer the golden era of that city, one of the things that they looked at was how to reinvigorate. And the arts and culture was the natural, how do we draw people? How do we bring the attractions? And so they were investing a lot in that. I still think it's not, I mean, M&M is known for Detroit, just outside of it. And there are areas which are sort of forming on the outskirts of it. I don't know. It's still, like, I remember you could buy properties there, and the city was so desperate for people to buy property that they would be like, buy one, get one free, so that you can just pay for the property tax.
Wow.
So that was one of the incentives they were doing. I don't know if they're still doing that now, but it is something where they're like, we just need to pay our taxes. Like, we just need to have income generation. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's very real. Like, we can't sit around and assume that the city that we live in will continue to always grow, grow, and grow. Because if something happens, let's say flooding becomes an issue, then it could change the dynamic nature of a city. I mean, one of the things that also I spoke with Gulshan, and we're here at her space at Lohartika right now, was, what made Toronto the vibrant fabric that it is all of the multiculturalism and all of the diversity. And the challenge here was that you have little India, little Portugal, little Greek, like Greek town, Chinatown, and as we had the different waves of immigration, communities and populations would form, like Bangla Town, right? Which is over on the East End, or Little Jamaica. But all of these areas, in some ways, because of the cost of living being so much and gentrification happening, newcomers can't afford to live. Newcomers can't afford to start businesses because I know the rents are quite high and people are looking for AAA tenants. And one of the things that Gulshan spoke about was how her husband was able to build his business, not because he had the traditional check marks of financial creditworthiness, but because of his social capital with his community. And when you don't have community, that's one structure. What do you have if you don't check off all the, I've got the financial capital, right? And it just brings in certain types of people from certain economic spheres. And so one of the things that Gulshan was talking about was, if Toronto is known for its multiculturalism, but yet the communities aren't able to survive, and we see this in a post-COVID era where a lot of small businesses, especially in ethnic communities, I mean, let me just take this thought one step back, is why was it that so many people from ethnic communities would have small businesses? Because many people wouldn't hire them. And so they said, well, if no one's going to hire me, fine. I'm going to open up a small convenience store. I'm going to open up, and just my family would work it, right? And you think about the convenience stores, or you think about a fruit stand, and it would be the whole family coming together to help, or a restaurant. It would start off with everybody like, I can cook. I can do this on my own. I don't have to rely on other people. And so I feel very much that that's what Toronto's humble beginnings were, of immigrant communities. And we start seeing these pop-ups of, even in the West End, of women who have immigrated or who are refugees who are like, hey, we've got our kitchen and we're going to cook something. And I've worked with organizations that are not necessarily food banks, but they're like community hubs where people to celebrate the foods from the communities, and they sell. I mean, even Regent Park has that. Mm-hmm. But what happens when gentrification happens and these communities have to disperse because they can't afford to live in the city? And many people are moving out to the burbs. Honestly, one of the best places to eat is Scarborough. Scarborough is the place to eat. And I love it because it's more affordable. But that takes people out of Toronto proper. So what what if, what happens, so what? I don't know. So sorry, my brain just went on this like, if we don't actively think about our actions or our lack of actions, it'll change the shape. Like little India, where we are, is changing because the people who live here are not the original people the demographic who was living here. Most of those people are moving further east, like further out into the GTA. So I don't know. It's just something I have noticed, and really Gulshan put that thought of, well, what can the city do to help protect ethnic enclaves? We know that there's systemic challenges with it. What can we do to, protect that so that Toronto is a travel destination, right? Because one of the things that I think Blog TO or something had put up was, it's a disappointment, but why, right? Is the diversity, are the communities changing? We have to ask that question. I don't know.
We have to. We absolutely have to. And conventional strategic planning, conventional estimates and assumptions and ways of looking at the future we have a predisposition to thinking 10% more, 20% more continuous growth in one direction. So everything that you mentioned could do a trajectory that is if this, then that, based on the past.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's other ways of looking at it. For example, one scenario was Toronto underwater. Let's look at another scenario. Toronto being purchased by the states.
Okay.
So if Toronto was purchased by the states, what does that mean? That means, in my practice, we would use a framework of looking at the social, political, economic, environmental, and values and technology, whatever you're going to put around that box, and start to go through what are the implications in each case. So perhaps the social implications of being purchased by an American country, perhaps our culture might become more Americanized. Or, perhaps our healthcare system becomes two-tier. So
we're not that far off on a couple of these fronts. So
right. So if we look at this extreme scenario, and then just like you did with the flood maps, pull that back to actually how much of real estate is owned by foreign entities in this city?
Yeah.
And how much of that means that major buildings in downtown are going out, that condos are owned by foreign investors who are negligent or vacant or
not present.
They turn into Airbnbs. We have, no social infrastructure in downtown Toronto, to the point where someone can get murdered in broad daylight and no one will be there to say, that's not right. You can't do that on my street.
Yeah.
So with an extreme scenario, you can start to really look for like the opportunities or the unintended consequences of the way we think things are going.
Yeah.
But, and I use the word but very rarely. I like yes and. We can look at other examples of what this looks like around the world as clues to it not going in the direction that we think it might be. So if we think of, well, let me throw this to you because you have a much broader purview on the way cities work and the way ownership works. So if we're going to take foreign investment as an example in a city of this size, are there other cities or pockets in this city that buffer against that?
Well, I mean, recently, like laws were enacted so that foreign buyers couldn't buy to protect that as a protectionist measure, right? And so that had just came into effect this year. And even leading up to it, there were policies put in place to minimize that. So I don't know, does that answer your question in that way?
It does. It
like
does.
BC has enacted it because they saw a lot of foreign investment. I don't think that, and, in terms of the perception and the reality, I don't know, because there are people who are also like permanent residents and all of these things. But I mean, yeah.
So with this example, what we just talked through is the assumption that foreign investors will continue in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not thinking about that, then perhaps it could continue. Vancouver did think about that. They went ahead into the future and then scrolled back.
Right.
What does this mean if there's a lot of foreign investment?
Yeah.
And then I'm not sure if it's still there, but they brought on the tax.
Yep.
That is, you can talk about that because
I mean, Toronto also followed suit after. Like Vancouver has kind of like spearheaded that, and then we kind of like Toronto has done it, right, to do that. In terms of foreign investment, like it's always like a double-edged sword because it's like, is there really a lot of foreign investment? Are they like, is it really impact our environment in terms of the purchase supply? And sometimes yes, sometimes no, because I think it depends on how you look at it. And so for the recent tax, with the recent policy that said that you can't be a foreign buyer, that has made people go, well, wait a minute, like what's the flip side of that? Of not having investment, of people coming. So there are always two sides to the story. And so I hear it from both ends and then there are, I won't say that there are loopholes, but there are exceptions like, well, you might be Canadian, but you live abroad. And so you're not living in Canada. Are you considered a foreign buyer? No, you're not, right? But it has all of these ripple effects where people go, they're different scenarios, but, like I'm Canadian, I live abroad and, and those type of questions. So it goes like both ways. I hear it from both sides. Like, wait, we have to protect it because if we allow too many foreign investors to come, it artificially inflates the cost of everything because where's this money coming from? And then on the flip side, it's like, but this is an investment into the community. Right? So it's contextual, right?
It's contextual. And I bet if we had more time, I could help you to hold a conversation where it's not just
binary
or that.
Yeah.
So this is the work that I help people do.
Right.
Is get to a place where it's not a binary, and then holding different scenarios, which seem to be extreme.
Yeah.
And turning that into a conversation about implications.
It's so awesome. Like, I mean, it is really great because oftentimes, even in the work that I do, there will be like policies that are black and white with some gray areas because there's always context. There's always, every situation is a little bit different. And so when you see media and it says the market's going to drop and this is going to happen and the prices are going to go up, in general, yes, maybe, right? Yes, and if we were to go down that trajectory, every area is a little bit different, right? And so I have to tell my clients and say to them, okay, I know you're seeing this on the news. It might be very alarming and very scary. You think that your house is going to be worth 50% less or whatever percentage it is, or you're going to think, I'm going to get a great deal and pay nothing. And I'm like, that's not necessarily the truth behind it. It's contextual, right? And we know, and so I have to provide that extra analysis behind it. And so it's not that simple. Media does a headline, yes. But if you dig beneath the surface, there's more context. And so it sounds like with the futures thinking and the systems thinking that you apply in the lens, it is teasing out those details and teasing out those complexities and saying, okay, it's not that simple, but how do we, I don't know, like I feel like you just basically took a closet and you pulled out every little thing and then it's like, okay, then what? Then what happens?
Great. So it can seem overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, we can put every potential scenario on the table and never get through the day.
Yeah.
Or the year, right? There's just too many things to think about. And that's kind of where corporate scenario planning started.
Yeah.
Right. And there's still corporations that use this particular method of what if, and you can't hold all of that in your hands or your brain or, you know, on one computer. So what we do is I like to get to a place where there's a small number of extreme scenarios to provoke conversations like this.
Right.
And we use the future as a way of getting away from what we're mired in today.
Right. So you create some distance.
Yes.
By projection, sort of.
Yeah. That's actually the word that we use. So,
I'm so smart. No, I'm just joking.
You can just see in my mind, it fills right out. So when we, there's a couple of things that I've learned in my studies, in my practice, is that we tend to think that the future is menacing.
Okay.
Because of all those news stories that you just mentioned, right? They're binary, they're crystal clear. There's a photo of somebody or a location or whatever. You can see it, it's palpable. And that just gets repeated all the time. You can't have a conversation with somebody about, you know, them talking about or griping even, right? About things that aren't positive. Like this is our human nature. Drama sells. It's more totally interesting to talk about tension. So we have a predisposition to thinking that, you know, things that are more negative, we even have more terms for negative emotions than we do for positive emotions.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And so we have a predisposition for, it's not necessarily pessimism. It's just looking for the tiger.
Okay.
You know,
like be aware of something that you don't know, like the lurking, the unknown.
Exactly. So when we have that as a preset, what we can end up doing is like neurologically kind of shutting down opportunities.
Okay.
Because we can't handle it. So when we have this blurriness of the future, like it's not clear, it's kind of menacing and all that stuff, we now can recognize that and troubleshoot against it.
Okay. We have some distance from it so that those natural predispositions of the negative, like, oh no, like be careful, we could just kind of create a buffer to start processing the what if, yes, and.
Exactly. And I'll give you an example. I was working with the Ottawa Food Bank, and their big question was, what if we didn't exist in 2050 because there was no food insecurity in Ottawa? That's a very innovative idea.
Okay.
And throughout the organization, some people got why we were asking that question. How radically would that change the way the organization operates today? So if their North Star is that there's no food insecurity in 2050, does that mean that investing all of their money in non-perishable foods now is going to help food security? No, these are incremental changes. These are little things that turn the temperature dial on the thermostat, right? But they're unsustainable. So by jumping ahead 30 years, they started asking themselves, well, why do we exist? What's our mission? What is food insecurity? What are the threats to it? And removed themselves from how much they pay in rent right now, how much the organizations, like the monopolies on the food system, actually control how much food the food bank has to give away. There's a whole bunch of things that they get away from and can ask bigger questions. And so the conversations that we started having are, what if the city of Ottawa doubles, triples? Because those are in 30 years, because that's the projections. Well, what if there's climate refugees that show up in Ottawa because it's a environmentally stable place?
Mm-hmm.
So with all of these sort of day-to-day nitty gritties that, can bother us. Like, we don't have enough, farmers in the area because they can't make a sustainable living, and so on and so on. How are we going to do that? You get into a place where hiring will change.
Right.
You get into a place where the how you serve the community changes.
Yeah.
You get into a place where if this is their intention and their hope, then who are partners that they need to talk to and make friends with and advocate with and for in order to achieve this mission. Yeah. So it just really, really pops up the problem and potential and decisions that you make today into a completely different realm.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can see how just kind of separating, going so far out, or kind of creating something that seems so black and white or just kind of like shocking can really shake things up. Because I do think, I can't help but think about the political climate that we're in, where it seems like there's a lot of political apathy and there's a lot of feeling of, I can't do anything about it. And everybody's going about political campaigns the same way they've done for years and years and years, and not responding to how people's needs have changed. Right? Because, it's the same old, same old. So how do we change those conversations? How do we not repeat the same mistakes that we've done before? Right? And I think we kind of sort of run hamsters in a wheel doing the same thing over and over again. And it seems like Future's thinking, the application of it is really to say, wait a minute, let's look at it in a different way. And the way we look at it differently is by projecting, it's the questions that we pose. Like when I was doing my graduate studies, it was always about qualitative, quantitative research methodologies and how you approach it. And it always came down to, it's not what questions were asked, it's what questions weren't asked. And the bias, like by looking inherently in the line of questioning, what is the inherent bias of the person who formed those questions? Unconscious bias. So I don't know, like I'm just sort of, my brain is kind of popping a little bit as I think about what you're saying and the ways that it could be applied in so many different scenarios that we've just done right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm so excited. The way that my business is going right now is I'm starting to work with cultural institutions. Yeah. Because they have a different type of educational reach. Yeah. Right. Experiential learning. Yes. They have a mission to reflect the culture.
Yes.
And typically it's reflecting the culture of the past or the present.
Mm-hmm.
However, how might we create a space to reflect the culture of the future and ask, is this what we want?
Yeah.
So one of the things that when you're talking about qualitative and quantitative data, the information that you're getting in is information that is up to date.
Right.
There's a whole bunch of questions that aren't necessarily asked that don't have to do with qualitative or quantitative data. It can be other ways of knowing.
Yeah.
It can be bringing your whole self to the table as someone who is Torontonian, who is of a certain age, of a certain cultural background, of a certain education level, and bringing that into the question of, well, how might I be a good ancestor, and how might my culture reflect what being a good ancestor looks like?
Yeah.
And cultural institutions, as an example, being a place to hold this conversation.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that those are conversations that they're so vital and so important. And I don't know, when I was in the art museum world, the culture institution world, it just seems so like people are like, oh, well, isn't it so lofty that you can be in your ivory tower talking about these things? But we need all these people in the world, the financiers, the bankers, the tech people, the arts people. Bless you. Bless you. Thank you. I always sneeze in multiples, just so you know.
Good luck.
But it's like all of these things are a part of the fabric of the time, like of our people culturally, like time frames and all that stuff. And it's very interesting, like just thinking about that. I'm just kind of processing that right now as you're talking about it in terms of culture institutions, of looking, who are we? Like, we are in an age right now where people reflect, like, look at all these things that have happened before. It impacts where we are now. People carry trauma. Like, you know, I mean, we see that, right, with the Indigenous movement for truth and reconciliation, and honoring what has happened and trying to reshape what the future can look like for future generations. And I don't know. I don't even know where to start. Like, it just seems like when it comes back to the overwhelming part of, these are such important questions, and it's like, how do we think about it, and how do we situate it in a way that is digestible and palatable? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know,
I'd love to say that that's a question that can be answered. It's a question that the answer is going to be dynamic, and it depends, and it has to be inclusive.
Yeah.
And any answer that you and I come up with in this moment right now could, if it's the right answer, it may be relevant only for a second.
Right.
Because it may be too specific. So when we think about the future, what we're doing is we're exercising a muscle that helps us to feel like we can be smart, not just today.
Yeah.
So we have this, it's a really weird thing that people do. It's sort of, again, it's our like predisposition to not be able to see the future too clearly. Otherwise we'll be overwhelmed. We have a predisposition to think that we'll be smarter now than we are in the future. And we also have a predisposition to think that we're smarter now than we were in the past.
Yeah.
Like at an individual level, at a societal level, like, oh, I can't believe that I, took that degree because it's completely useless. Or I can't believe that we persecuted people in the way that we did because they're people, right?
Yeah.
So we judge ourselves, and then we don't believe that we can make better decisions in the future.
Okay. So I was just thinking about like kind of like grounding it, because I know on your website, futurespresent.com, that you actually have it's like a mind map, right? Because I want to kind of connect this with, if other people who are listening are like, oh, this is really interesting. How do I kind of take an idea and break it down, or work on an issue and kind of expand? It's like the mind, it's kind of got boxes, and you start with a center, and then it just is a flow chart sort of as to how to break that down, right? Like, and I'm just trying to think, like, how can people apply the work that you're doing to their own lives?
One of the things that is really, really, really challenging, again, is we, you talked about putting everything on the table and then trying to make a decision from there.
Mm-hmm.
It's overwhelming, not useful.
Yeah.
So let's try to pare it down to a question. Right?
A question, right?
When people come to you with a question, there's, they want to be in a location, right? They may not know all of the things that they want about it, but you help them to narrow their focus.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You could help them to expand their focus.
Yeah.
If that would be, where they are in their journey.
Yeah.
You would serve them in the best way that you can.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you do help expand their focus.
Yeah.
And then come to a decision point.
Yeah.
So if we're going to do this in our own lives, one of the things that we can do is to start with our values.
Okay.
How do I want to contribute in the future? So one of the methods that I kind of created, or techniques that I created, is called Making Futures Present. And it helps people to imagine, in the case that I designed it, 4 different extreme futures. And it's based on their assumption. So, this is what I expect. This is what I really prefer the future to be like. This is what might be unlikely. And it removes them from their own wishes.
Okay.
So you might ask a kid, what do you want to do when you grow up?
Yeah.
And the answers that they give you are based on things that they know about jobs and industries and sectors right now. But if you provide an opportunity for them to think about how they want to contribute in the world, the job title falls away.
Yeah.
And over the course of like 100 interviews with people who are in high school, people who are on the edge of retirement or whatever, and asking themselves about 20 years in the future, with enough kind of scaffolding that they're able to imagine a day like February 19, 2033, or something like that. There's a whole bunch of things that are roughly able to be understood.
Yeah.
So roughly the temperature, probably the time of day the sun comes up,
Right.
and goes down, right? Like gravity will probably be the same. So we start to baseline a bunch of things that we feel are or know that are going to be the same, and then work out from there. And what people tend to say is they want great conversation. So thanks for the tea.
Yeah.
They want access to fresh food.
Yeah.
Not just healthy, but fresh. And they want to give back as a mentor, as a coach, as a teacher, as an elder, and things like that. And this process of considering your deep values and your assumptions about the future is really life-shifting.
Totally. Like you've just kind of, by using this as an example and applying how you can use a future model into life. Like for instance, the projection is that for kids who are in primary school right now, 50% of the jobs that will exist when they're in their working years don't even exist yet. Right. And I think that was the World Economic Forum study. And it's fascinating to think about, because what's a YouTuber? That was not something in the vernacular from 10 years ago. Right. And now it's like, oh, like kids are like, oh, I want to be an influencer or whatever. Right. And so things have shifted. But what you just said about like, okay, what's your value? What are you passionate about? What do you want to contribute? Like, and then less title. And if I reflect on my own personal life, I remember when I was in graduate school, I spoke with my professor and I was like, well, what do I do after I get my master's in education? And she was like, Lee, what's a job you want 10 years from now? Or what do you want to do 10 years from now? And she goes, you start today, right? And you follow your heart and you follow your passion. I've been so fortunate to have such wonderful leaders and mentors to guide me and ask, like, pose that question. I'm like, I don't know. What do I want? And I started realizing the choice I make today is a dot that connects me to tomorrow. Right? So what I choose to do today either helps expand me, like takes me forward, but creates new opportunities that will create new opportunities into what the future is. And I have to say, where I am today is very much because of that. And when I look back at the journey that I took to come here, all of those were building blocks. Like, I don't regret any of it. I'm so happy. Like, and there's no job that I took that was based on a title. And so when I think about what you were just saying about futures, it's like, what is your value system? Like, even creating these podcasts, like, they're part of sharing the amazing people in my world who have such outside of the box thinking, who are passionate about the things they do. And it's just really awesome. Like, now I'm sort of making that connection of like, oh, maybe that was like futures thinking of what do I want to be doing in the future, and looking at the values that would align with that. And then that tells the story, as opposed to, I want to be a doctor. It might come from, I care about people. I have a skill set for this, or I don't know. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Am I getting it sort of? -ish?
Totally. And it is futures thinking. There is a spectrum of futures readiness.
Yeah.
And
yes,
that's something that, we have to hold with so much care. And not every practice, every person, every context is, I guess, the right time to ask.
Yeah.
About the future. I used to work with people who were street involved, and you couldn't ask them about what do you want to do tomorrow because they were worried about where they were going to sleep tonight.
Yeah, and that like brings us to the Maslow's theory of, well, they have to meet their immediate needs of shelter, food, shelter, before you can do it. Mm-hmm. But back to your point.
Well, there's creating a place of calm, and safety for them.
Yeah.
For everyone. And we're in this world right now where the youth are like, they don't have that safety. They think that, I heard this analogy that a little kid said to an adult, like, you drink your apple juice and then you drink mine.
Okay.
And, this is what you've done with our world. Like, we have nothing good left. So that hope and that desperation and so on. So giving them a place where they can feel safe to think about the future is a baseline, right? And this applies for everybody. When we have that created space, whether it's, temporary in a great workshop, or whether it's, sort of on a holiday type feel, or, great conversation with friends, and you can sort of, solve all the problems of the world and not have a lot of stake or risk in it, because, you're not making decisions. You're just chatting in a low risk situation. Then we can start to look around, right? So like, what are the things, who are the people that are role models for, doing what you want to do? Yeah. Whether they're an influencer online, whether they are a community mediator. Yeah. What is the thing that they're doing that is interesting or motivating or, causing some kind of good feeling for you. And then you can start to ask the more sophisticated questions with the more like the implications, the unintended consequences. Yeah. And so there's part of this like futures readiness. Yeah. That has to be scaffolded up. Yeah. And, back in the example of the food bank, there's people there who are thinking about the future as a luxury. There's people there who thinking about the future as an imperative. And there's people who are there that thinking about the future is, part of their job, but it's very, very, very immediate. None of those things are quote unquote wrong or right. It's just their orientation and their ability to process information.
Yeah.
And their ability to ask questions. So taking some time, and I'll just mention briefly the book that I'm writing.
Yeah. I was going to talk about, like, you're writing a book about Mavericks.
Yeah. So it's called Making Futures Present, and it's for future thinking maverick decision makers who are, buried in uncertainty and need to make a change now. So the reason why I bring it up with this is that in the interviews that I've done and continue to do, and Lee, you're on the list.
Yay!
As a maverick, and as someone who works in times of uncertainty and makes decisions in times of uncertainty, of great futurity is the word.
Great futurity. Okay.
Right. So like signing a lease is a long-term decision.
Right. Yeah. You're signing, buying a home is long-term decision.
Right.
Yeah.
Growing a family is a long-term decision of great futurity.
Yeah.
Being friends with your, kid's friend's parent may be a decision of great futurity or not. Right.
Yeah.
That depends on what you value. So in the interviews, what I found is that uncertainty is something that is on a spectrum. So some of the people that I've spoken to, like art directors, for freelance art directors, they are always in quote unquote uncertainty, but it doesn't make them feel uncomfortable. I've spoken to CEOs of financial institutions, and making a decision isn't hard for them because they've gotten to a place where they feel like if they've made a decision, they can make another one, and then they can make another one. And if they've made a decision they don't like, they can change it. So these two things are dynamic. And then the book is for Mavericks, which seems like it's an archetypical character. And what I've found, again, through the discussions that I've been having, and these are people with, interviews from Disney and Meta and like the largest engineering firms in the world, and people who are just, recently unemployed and stuff like that, is that in making decisions in times of uncertainty, as a maverick, you pull levers for, okay, this is a moment where I need strong emotional intelligence. This is a time where I need to lead with bold predictions, or lead with bold, not predictions, but like lead with bold desires. And then sit back and listen. So a maverick is someone who it's a way of being, as opposed to, again, like a title.
Yeah.
And people who are more maverick don't necessarily self-identify.
How interesting. Yeah. They just do.
They just do. They just do. And happen to pull these traits.
Right.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
So
it's very interesting as I think about it, because I remember when I've gone through, like, I've had a very unconventional career path, I think, but I've always followed my heart, which comes back to my professor who was like, think where you want to be 10 years from now and what would make you happy. And I used to look at my life in chapters, right? And that's kind of the evolution, and it sort of materialized. So it is important what we think today, because that actually plants the seed for tomorrow. And no, it's just like that what you're talking about, being a maverick decision maker. And if you make a decision, you can continue making decisions. Oh yeah, I can just change my mind. But that's also a privilege of being able to do that as well.
It's a privilege. It's also a mindset.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just to kind of push back on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Do it. Push back.
There's another model that I really, really appreciate, which is by Manfred Max Neef,
Okay.
who is an Argentinian or Brazilian economist.
Okay.
And instead of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which was originally designed as a ladder
Yeah.
for soldiers coming back from World War II.
Okay.
We need to make sure that they're safe and healthy and everything. And then we need to make sure, so this framework was, how do we reintegrate them into society?
Okay.
And it worked. Like
Yeah.
the 70s, 80s, 60s, like all of a sudden, the soldiers from World War II were doing well, so well that we see where we are today. But Manfred Max Neef's fundamental human needs
Yeah.
is 9 different needs. Some of them are subsistence, but some of them are creativity and freedom and connection, and restoration and so on.
I love that. I'm going to have to check this out.
It's really, I'll send you a link because it's really, it really kind of sits with me as a interesting concept, because he posits that we can't have all 9 at the same time. We can't be focused on our purpose and mission at the same time as restoration or sleeping.
It actually challenges the notion of multitasking.
Exactly. Which is a whole other conversation.
Yeah, no, I mean, but it's so irrelevant in the sense of, trying to make sense of this world, like even using this form that we're talking to have a longer form conversation, to delve deeper into concepts and ideas, and to kind of think about the interconnections and how it does kind of circle back in some ways, or it actually grows in a trajectory that you didn't even think about, and allow that space for organicness is so important, right? And I agree with you. I used to be like, oh, I'm a great multitasker. I'm like, actually, no, I'm not. Like, even now when I think about it, I like try to be like, this is on my list of things to do today. Yeah, I'll probably do 3 out of that. Like, I'm trying to be more realist, like, as opposed to the optimist. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'll just let people down if I say I'm going to do all these things. And yeah, it's very interesting. I'm definitely send the link, and we'll add it to the link tree here.
Yeah. And just to kind of close the loop on that, about making decisions being a privilege, there's the mindset to it. And what Max Neef is proposing is that you don't have to have material goods in order to feel wise or like you have something to offer.
Yeah.
Which is the way the pyramid is created.
Right.
Like, you're not worthy of education unless
You have these other things.
in place.
So fascinating.
So it comes down to mindset and feeling like Nelson Mandela, as an example, did, that he had choice and agency. Even though he was in the same physical jail as other people were at the time for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
His mindset, and there are other people who've lived through this, the mindset isn't a luxury, it's a choice.
Yeah, for sure. Mindset is also what differentiates top athletes.
Yeah.
Right? Survival. How do you thrive? It all comes down to, I can do it or I can't do it. Like, I've been watching like shows where people are in competition, and the difference is, I looked at that guy and I was like, no, there's no way I can do it. And the moment they thought that, they're like, I give up. Or nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to keep going. And so it comes down to mindset. So if we were to kind of end on a note of futurist, what would that be?
Ask that question again.
If we were to end, as we wrap up our conversation, for futurist, being a futurist or thinking futurist, what would that be?
I'm a very rare zebra or breed in as a futurist. I'm really optimistic.
That's great. No, I'm an optimistic.
That's why we have fun.
Yeah. Fun is everything. I mean, that's why I was like, we're going to have a conversation. It's going to be awesome.
I'm very, very, very optimistic because of a lot of the things that I've said is that we have mindset. We have ways of thinking in granular nuance. We have ways of rationalizing certainty and uncertainty. Mm-hmm. We have mechanisms for thinking about the future, which seems unwieldy and unknowable. A lot of futurists are pessimistic, and I'm thankful for that. But for me, I choose to be an optimist.
So I think the future can be bright if that's your mindset. I totally think that that's wonderful, because I think the tools that you have to share is a tool that helps us determine our future. It helps set that, and it is a guiding principle. So I think that you offer something so valuable in terms of developing the skills, developing the foresight and the strategic thinking necessary to guide us into the future. So what's not to be optimistic about that? That's awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Maggie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Lee. I really appreciate this too. And thanks for being such a high level thinker.
Oh, thank you.
and grounded at the same time.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. No, it was just really fun. Like, I appreciate just thinking about what you're saying and kind of like, okay, how do I apply that? Because I'm always application, like what you said, how do I apply that into my life or in other people's lives? Mm-hmm. You know, because it has to be tangible. Like we have to be able to feel that connection. And how do I connect that work? And so I know the work that you do is really interesting. I'm just like, I don't 100% really know if I understand it, but how can we tell your story so that other people can see the value of it, right? Like, because I think it is really valuable, and your optimist nature is what makes it amazing that we can make a future that we want. And so many people can benefit from that.
And this is why I'm a designer.
Yeah.
Because I want things to be tangible. I want things to be imaginative at the same time. Yeah. So some of the things that, I do are postcards from the future. Yeah. And a project that I have created with some health researchers. It's called Nod from 2050. Mm-hmm. And it's an interactive site where youth who are thinking about vaping, e-cigarettes and all that stuff, go into the site. They create a postcard for themselves, even though postcards,
may not exist.
Yeah, antiquated concept for them right now. So it's called Nod from 2050, and the experience serves up what is a opportunity to reflect on not being a vapor. And it's a rewarding, happy experience.
How interesting. Yeah. So it's like how to stop smoking, how to stop vaping, sort of ish.
It's the opposite of that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's how does it feel because you don't? What did you gain? What can you do?
Yeah. It's just that thinking. It's just like pivots it so that you look at it in a very different way. Mm-hmm. We need more of that. we totally do, because we're so stuck and mired in our ways of asking the same questions. And when you ask the same questions, you get the same answers. So we just really need to shift that.
Yeah, I know. We do need more of that. There's a lot of reasons why we don't do it. And I have made it a mission to help 8 million people understand the future's not set in stone.
I love it. That's powerful.
So thanks for the opportunity to help me move that needle a few more people at a time.
For sure. That's all that we can do, right? One step at a time.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks, Lee.
Awesome. Thank you. That's fun.